What's up, you guys? Void here, coming back at y'all with another top 10 video. This time we're going to be going back to themes again. We're going to be looking at the top 10 best Blink-related cards in the Commander format. Not to be confused with cards that are just genuinely good with ETB effects, but just cards that exile creatures, artifacts, permanents in general, and either can bring them back to the field immediately or bring them back at the end of turn or at the end step, whenever it happens. This is extremely useful in abusing ETBs. It's also good at dodging removal, and it's a very fun theme to build your deck around in this format. For the purposes of this list, Flicker and Blink are pretty much going to be synonymous with one another. They pretty much mean the same thing. Some of the most fun experiences that I've had in this format have been with Flicker decks. They're so much fun. You get to just abuse the living shit out of ETBs. It's just incredible. It can be very competitive and powerful, but just so much fun at the same time. Let's go into the honorable mentions. We have Cloud Shift, Essence, Flux, and Ghostly Flicker. Ghostly Flicker, the only one of the three that can hit lands and artifacts as well as just creatures, and it can also hit 2 instead of just 1, so all are pretty decent. The only downside being that they're going to be one-time uses unless you can abuse them with something like an Eternal Witness or an Archaeomancer. Other than that, though, they're pretty small and insignificant compared to a lot of the other cards that can get multiple uses out of them. Flicker Wisp and Felidar Guardian are very similar. Flicker Wisp is a little bit better because it can hit your opponent's stuff as well. Felidar is just your stuff. Pretty weak though, unless you can flicker these and abuse these as well. But these do see some play in the format. Flicker Wisp is usually a modern card. Then we have Angel of Condemnation, a newer card from Hour of Devastation. Has some potential. I don't like the fact that it has to tap in order to blink, which is the only reason why I wouldn't put it on this list. It does have the upside, though, of being able to deal with a creature and just keep it in exile. So it does have that upside, but if it didn't tap to do any of these things, I would definitely consider putting it on this list, especially the second ability. That would be pretty powerful. Now onto the actual list. Number 10 is Flicker Form. Pretty much the only aura that actually does anything like this. You get to pay 4 mana to flicker a creature that it is attached to. And it also does this for other auras that are attached to it, so as soon as it comes back in Flicker Form, pretty much automatically reattaches itself to that creature, which is the main reason why I put it on this list. It's pretty good. I wouldn't say it's my favorite Flicker effect. In certain enchantment-based decks that aren't necessarily Flicker-based decks, it can be abused in something like a Bruna Light of Alabaster deck, similar things. Number 9 is Miss Meadow Witch. Sort of just sits on the field and you get to pay 4 mana. Doesn't have to tap in order to do that, so you can just sit on a ton of mana and just blink every single creature. Whether it's your creature or their creature, it does cost a lot of mana though, so it's not preferable to some other cards on this list, but it is definitely worth mentioning. It's decent for what it does. It's a 2 mana creature. It's just going to sit on the field. It's usually not that big of a threat, so the work that it can put in late game is definitely something to be afraid of. Number 8 is Restoration Angel. Does see a ton of play in Modern, but is also pretty decent in Commander, believe it or not. The fact that it has Flash is just always going to be good. Whenever you can do something in response to something else in this format, answers are always going to be good, and there are a ton of good ETBs. You can always do this in response to something else, response to blocks, whatever you want to do. It's just a pretty good card. The only downside being is that it has to be non-angels, but who really cares about that? There aren't too many good angels with ETBs anyway. So, pretty good ETB. The fact that it has Flash is the main reason why it made the list over cards like Flicker Wisp and Felidar Guardian. The only other downside to it is that it has to hit a creature. But really, the fact that it does have Flash is pretty good in a lot of these decks that aren't going to be running counter spells or things like that. You like having answers. Number 7 is Eerie Interlude with a nod to Ghostway. Ghostway is pretty much going to be another honorable mention. It is strictly worse than Eerie Interlude because of the fact that it has to exile all of your creatures. So if you have a creature with +1/+1 counters, those +1/+1 counters are removed. You don't want that happening. Eerie Interlude lets you select which creatures you want to exile and then bring back. And the fact that Eerie Interlude brings them back at the beginning of the end step is super good. because Ghost Way brings them back at the end of the turn, which is completely different, and it can miss other triggers. And you don't want to miss those triggers. There are a ton of cool interactions at the beginning of end steps that you can miss. Eerie Interlude is also awesome because it's just one of those cards that you can kind of fool around with cards like Eternal Witness and Archaeomancer, and effectively just block for days or get a ton of ETBs for days. And you can just keep doing this. Each time your opponent wants to attack you, you just make blocks and then you flicker them in response. So as long as they don't have something like flying, evasion, trample, stuff like that, you should be good to go. You can just dirtle for days at that point. Number 6 is Drazi Displacer. Pretty nasty. If you can get infinite colorless mana, you can pretty much just blink for days. And there are a lot of combos now associated with this guy. He is pretty decent in Modern now, but he's also fantastic in Commander. If you can just throw him into a good Flicker deck, good ETB deck, he's going to put in a ton of work. Much better than Meadow Witch because of the fact that the mana is more flexible and he's just white there. So you can put him in white decks and not just white and blue decks. So you have that flexibility both with the activation cost and the actual mana cost itself. Super powerful. It's only 3 mana as well to activate the ability compared to the 4 mana of Meadow Witch. And you also have the upside that it just brings the creature back immediately, so it allows you to keep flickering it however many times that you feel like it. So it's definitely better than Meadow Witch. It's just a great card for any flicker deck, really. Number 5 is Conjurers Closet. Definitely an artifact that you want to consider for any deck that can utilize ETBs, regardless of whether or not it's just an ETB-based deck. Something like Breya definitely wants to take advantage of this because you get to get multiple Thopter tokens. That's always good in that deck, as well as just creature decks in general that have good ETBs. But this is one of those at the beginning of end step triggers, which is why Eerie Interlude is also pretty good, is because then you get to trigger this after Eerie Interlude, have this go off, and then you get to exile the creatures again. So definitely an upside to that past card that we mentioned before. But Conjurer's Closet is just so flexible. It's 5 mana colorless, so you can throw it into as many different decks as you want to. It's not limited like other blue-white cards in Flicker. It's the main reason why it's higher on this list. But other than that, though, the downside is that it's just at the beginning of your end step. You get to exile a creature and then bring it back. You can only really take advantage of that if you have just one good creature. Doesn't do anything for artifacts or other permanents with good ETBs. Just creatures. But other than that, though, pretty good artifact that just sits on the field. Doesn't draw a ton of hate unless you have good creatures with good ETBs. But then again, that is the ideal situation. Number 4 is Venser the Sojourner. Essentially a better Conjurer's Closet for decks that can play blue and white. The fact that you can exile any permanent you control and then bring it back at the end of the turn is essentially going to double as a second Conjurer's Closet in your deck that can also deal with other permanents. But it's also good because you have other abilities there that are fantastic in creature decks or decks that I'm going to be getting onto later here where we talk about the legendary options on this list. But he also makes your creatures unblockable, and his ult is effectively a win con. Whenever you cast a spell, you get to exile a permanent. That is just brutal. And it's why he's not only one of the best cards in Flicker, but he's also one of the best planeswalkers for Super Friend decks. Just overall, a super powerful card to play and consider for your decks, whether it's just Flicker or just any of the abilities synergizing with your deck at all. Number 3 is one of the legendary options on this list, Brago King Eternal. Absolutely love this guy. Whenever he deals combat damage to an opponent, you get to exile any number of non-land permanents you control, and then you get to bring them back. Effectively, you can just play a ton of good mana rocks that you can tap them down before your combat, and then they come back untapped. So stuff like Grim Monolith, Mana Vault, Basalt Monolith, things that normally don't untap on their own. Unless you pay mana into them, you can just untap those with Brago, as well as just good creatures with good ETBs, because hey, that's what the deck's supposed to do. The downside immediately is the fact that you do have to deal combat damage with him. Very underrated, but a huge downside to him, and it's why he may not be as powerful as he used to be, is because of the fact that all you really have to do to stop this deck, and I think people have caught on to it already, is the fact that if you can just effectively get rid of Brago, remove him in response to equipping the Lightning Greaves, things like that, you can pretty much shut this deck down. When he's not on the field, it's a huge deal, and the deck either does a lot or it does nothing without him. So it's a lot to take into consideration, but besides that, he's still incredibly fun to play with. If you love blue-white creatures and you love their ETBs, there are a ton, and he can abuse all of them. Super aggressive, and you can really go off and have huge turns with this guy. So if he works well, he's going to go off and do a ton of awesome things. If you can't get him on the field consistently and attack and deal combat damage, you're sadly not going to do much with him. So I love him, but he has that obvious downside. Now, number 2 is the next legendary creature option on this list, and that is Rune of the Hidden Realm. Very similar to Miss Meadow Witch, Drazi Displacer on having an activated ability that does blank a creature. The downside is that he does have to tap, but the upside is that he has Vigilance and Trample. So you can attack first, get some damage in, and then decide you want to blank. And that's not even the reason why I believe he's the best commander option for blank and flicker decks. It's mainly because of the fact that he's in Bant colors, which gives you so many awesome options in creatures. You get green creatures. Some of the deadliest ETBs are on green creatures. We're talking about Acidic Slime. We're talking about Terrastodon. We're talking about Craterhoof Behemoth. I mean, there are just a ton of awesome green creatures to choose from, and being able to abuse all of those in a flicker deck, that's going to be just nasty. And of course, being in green means you also get awesome tutor options, more consistency, better ramp strategies. Imagine being able to flick a Wood Elves over and over again. I mean, that's just hilarious. You get pretty much every land from your deck that you really need, because a lot of your green creatures are going to be ramping you up anyway. But yeah, Rune is just incredibly powerful because of the flexibility and the color combination, in addition to having a pretty good ability. So while he may not be straight up just as powerful as Brago, the fact that he enables you to have a deck that's going to be stronger and more consistent than Brago is the reason why I put him above Brago. And the fact is, you can also play Brago and Rune of the Hidden Realm, so there you go. You can still have your fun with Brago, put him in a Rune deck. Problem solved. Number 1 should be pretty obvious. If you've been thinking it this whole video, you were right. Deadeye Navigator, no doubt about it. He is 6 mana, but when he enters the battlefield, he gets to soul bond with a creature, or whenever another creature enters the battlefield as well, you get to soul bond it to Navigator. And effectively, each of those creatures gains 2 mana, you get to blink it. And that is super powerful. Obvious combos are with cards like Palinchron, Peregrine Drake, Great Whale to get infinite mana, as well as just pairing it with any disgusting creature to get a ton of ETB value. And this guy is notorious. Everybody wants him banned. I really don't think he's that big of a deal. I mean, he has a lot of busted interactions, but it's easier to solve that problem by just getting rid of the stupid Palinchron cards that untap lands. I mean, come on. He is very powerful, but when you consider the fact that the other flicker cards I showed you may not be all that powerful in themselves, him being the best flicker card, he just blinks creatures for 2 mana, which is super efficient, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily busted on its own. You have to have incredibly busted cards to enable him to be busted himself. So we could solve the problem, just ban the really busted cards, i.e. the Palinchron, Great Whale, Peregrine Drake BS that's been allowed in this format. Yeah, untapping lands is pretty busted. So Deadeye Navigator, though, very powerful with just any ETB, really. All the reasons why I think the flicker effect is pretty good. Having probably the most efficient activated ability to give to other creatures, allow them to flicker, that just makes him insanely powerful. Not necessarily ban-worthy to me, though. So anyway, guys, that was my top 10 list for the best flicker cards in the Commander format, or blink cards, whatever you want to call them. They're pretty much the same thing. Let me know what you think about the list. Let me know what your favorite flicker cards are, what your favorite blink cards are. Anyway, you guys have a wonderful day. Void here, signing off.